Beautiful.
Okay, excellent. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are tuning in today, whether it's live or via video recording. Welcome to CSTA's Professional Learning Series. Today is Wednesday, October 20th. 2021. Today's topic is on Bullying Prevention Month, which is next month, November. Today we are featuring an amazing presenter from Common Sense Media. That's Jamie Nunes. He's here to talk about some resources for computer science educators and educators all around, not just CS. And so we're really glad to have him here today. The standard that we're going to be focusing on is cultivating a positive classroom climate. We want to make sure that that our climate amplifies perspectives, abilities, and approaches and solutions, and that this is something that we truly value as educators. Jamie Nunes is coming to us from the Bay Area in California. He is a regional education manager at Common Sense Education Department. For the past 20 years, he's redefined education practices by designing creative learning networks for educators. He's a former high school teacher, school administrator, and after-school director. Jamie's facilitated a ton of PD workshops on student engagement and in digital spaces. When he's not working, you can find Jamie swimming in the ocean and or tending to his plants because he has quite a selection behind him. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you to all Jamie.
You're amazing. Thank you, Lily. Appreciate you all. Thank you for folks that are joining us on the call. Happy Wednesday to you all. Thank you for the space. So as Lily pointed out, my name is Jamie. I will begin with a quick story for you all. One of the reference points, one of the anchor moments that I've had in addressing digital stressors, the issues that we're going to be talking about today, occurred to me probably about, I want to say about 15 years ago, and it sort of continued to have an imprint in my life. A number of years ago, I had a student that came up to me when I was teaching and said, "Mr. Nuñez, I am pregnant." And at the school where I was working with, it was very uncommon for someone to actually say that, let alone be at our school during that time. So I spent the next 6 months, going through the process of engaging and helping to support the student as she was going through her process or going through her pregnancy. And what had happened is it was right around the same time that Facebook had opened up its platform. We know some of these techniques are really antiquated, but they opened up their platform so all folks that were 13 and up were able to kind of access and connect and share stories online. So as we were kind of going through this pregnancy, most of the students had started to post images of her pregnancy, started to post images with her. Bear in mind that the student was extremely quiet. She was very reserved prior to this announcement. So I'm going to fast forward in around April, May during this time. So we had expected her as an entire school community to have her child. And at the time, the principal and I went in and we looked at where she was having her baby. She had reported through Facebook that she was going to be having it in a particular hospital. And then she went missing, right? No one had heard from her. Parents didn't know where she was at. So, I took it upon myself to actually go in and see if she was at a particular hospital right around the time that she had posted her cryptic message. Nowhere to be found. I went to the other hospital here in San Francisco that we could potentially see, and there was no child there. And so 2 days passed, and she posted yet another message by saying, "I don't know why I did this." And I came to find out after kind of heavy investigation, both on social media as well as kind of connecting with others, that she actually had lied about the entire experience and that she was actually never pregnant. And I thought, oh, wow, what, it's the aha moment for me, in addition to kind of addressing this child's mental well-being and social well-being, was the broader issue, which is what was actually happening in social spaces that this child needed to feel validated, but more importantly, what stressors were happening as a result of the ongoing posting and the images that she had. So I share that story as a sort of starting point for us to think about the bullying and cyberbullying and issues around stressors more broadly, to think, what are the stressors that our kids encounter day in, day out in online spaces that we need to be mindful about naming and addressing for them. So first sort of call to action for you all. Next slide, if you'd like. That is to do just that in whatever role, whatever capacity that you're in. I want you to take a moment to really think about where are those actual spaces, both either in your classroom, across the county, if you're joining us through a county office, where are those spaces where we can normalize that stressors do occur? Again, I could give you some really basic examples. This could be if you're an elementary school teacher working with students. This could be in the playground area where students are emulating things that they're seeing online. This past week, I was at my child's school. She's an elementary school age student. She's in first grade, and they were reenacting things that they found in the famous show Squid, or the Netflix show Squid. And there's a cause for alarm, right? Oh no, what's actually happening? But these are kind of incidents where I start to think about how can I start engaging these conversations about potential stressors that might occur from these very everyday interactions. That might look like that. Perhaps you're joining us from a county office. You might think, what are the ways in which we're actually training our staff about ways to identify, or training our administrators best ways to identify stressors, and how can we expand that definition to include more broad issues that our kids are grappling with. So wherever you're at within the spectrum, something to kind of provide for you all. And then the second piece is kind of goes hand in hand, which is we want to provide spaces for our kids to both protect them and to feel like we're creating those parameters, but we also want to provide spaces where they themselves can start to understand and navigate these complex issues that come with these stressors. So we're building in these habits. And the best way, as a colleague of mine had shared, it's really easy to teach our kids about, what to do in case someone is being victimized by a bully online. It's really easy to say, well, this is what you need to do, and here's the process, or here's the protocol. It's much harder to help to coach that child and to navigate those spaces in the moment, and then practice with that child what they're actually doing to mitigate those issues in the first place, right? So this is what we're attempting to kind of do, which is filling out where those spaces are, where we might be able to address some of these habits online. Next slide. I'm going to start by kind of thinking about and taking a step back. So those are your call to actions. I'm going to ask you to marinate on that, really think about and reflect on how you might want to incorporate that. But we're going to start by taking a step back and saying, like, what's actually happening in digital spaces? What are the needs that we're seeing across the board? So I work with school districts across the western half of the United States, and I see all these unique trends. I'm in an attempt to consolidate all of that in the next few slides. Now, you might say, Jamie, you are so outdated, which I probably am, because technology moves so fast, but you'll kind of start to see patterns here. Next slide. We know that since the pandemic, when we've seen this firsthand with some of these TikTok challenges that some of our kids are encountering, we know that during the pandemic, our kids, our young adolescents, specifically those ages between 14 and 20, early 20s, we know that they are more likely to find connections when they're feeling stressed out. We know that the social media provides a gateway for them to feel supported in when they have that anxiety, that type of depression. We know that students have reported, based on our research that we've done at Common Sense, that they actually feel better when they're online. But here's the irony. Next slide. The irony is that we also know that these platforms, by design and by intention, are intended to keep their users connected to the space, right? So we know that as our kids get on Facebook or get on Instagram, there could be potential other harms or stress. This is a quote from one of the Wall Street Journal whistleblowers that came out through Facebook that share that they know that the work and some of the features on Instagram actually increases social comparisons amongst teenage girls. Right. So if I'm thinking about my 6-year-old, if she's going to be on a platform in 10 or so years, I'm already thinking ahead about what stresses might happen as a result from her comparing herself to others within that platform. Right. So we know that there's a tension that arises. It's a kind of an irony here. It's sort of like something that we have to navigate through. Next slide. So here's kind of where it all starts, right? So this is the backdrop. And the other trend that we want to see is like, so what happens when they're in these spaces? And again, I'm only referring to kids as they enter kind of the 5th grade on for a second, but I'm going to let you know kind of what this looks like on an elementary level. This is a survey that YPulse does. It's a sort of like an online media space where they actually report out on what actually is happening, what kind of content happens across these platforms. This is a results of something that happened in 2020 of last year, where they said the majority of content across these platforms include, if you kind of see this, comedy all across the board, right? So oftentimes our kids, when they're on these platforms, they want to go in to have a humorous moment. Think of yourself for a second. You know, if you were on YouTube, looking at that dog jump on a pool or something, right? Or for that person laughing, right? It actually makes us feel good, right? Those endorphins that come out. For our kids, that can often get convoluted very, very quickly when they find that the comedy is at the expense of others, right? That's where we're starting to kind of see a flip. So this slide is really intended to know that sometimes our kids just need that relief and they turn to social media for that. But oftentimes it gets confusing when there is some blurry lines between what comedy is and who is actually being made fun of or what is actually being humored at, things that you should be mindful of. And take a pause for a second, just so you are aware what we're going to be doing next. We're going to take these trends and we're going to really define them as under the guise of, or under the term digital stressors. And next slide, please. And what I mean by that is really this art. When we think about digital stressors, oh, nice. I like that you did that. Oh, that's nice. That's a really good article, by the way. The term digital stressors, as I do that, and I think as Lily goes back into that slide, you'll notice that is really stress caused by a negative interaction in online spaces. So I'm going to take an example for you all, just so you are aware of that. Let's say Jared and I are interacting and we're in 5th grade and we're on roadblocks and we're just kind of having a laugh with each other. And Jared says to me, you know what, Jamie? I really like that your black shirt. It really reminds me of this character that I made up on Roadblocks. And that character is a humorous character for Jared, and as he's playing this game, right? So Jared might share to his friend, you know, Jamie's black shirt reminds me of this character. Why don't we just call Jamie that particular character on Roadblocks? And what you'll start to notice early on is there's an association without me knowing about it, right? So instead of Jared calling me Jamie at this point, he might be calling me Blockface or whatever the it is that starts to create an actual a stress, in this case, by an engagement that actually happened in our spaces. Now, it might be Jared was not intending to do that, but without me informing him, without saying, you know, Jared, I like the fact that I wore a black shirt, but I don't like the fact that when you call me this name, this is what it does for me. We haven't built up that language for our kids yet. This is what we were talking about. So these are the stressors that we're going to look at. Next slide. And what you'll notice is, based on the trends that we're seeing, what you notice is two particular stressors that come out. So we were talking originally about cyberbullying, and I want to go deeper than that by talking about what those stressors are. Most of the time, the stressors that we see with our kids are rooted in 2 areas. The first is an engagement that's happened that creates hostility between someone. So it might be someone like Jason and I, like, you know, Jason, I never really liked your beard. I'm going to share it on social media to say that your beard doesn't, you know, and so there might be hostility as a result of that. And Jason, if you're on the call, I love your beard. Don't get me wrong. So that might be one. The second might actually be, and this is a little bit more nuanced, how to navigate someone that you could potentially care about, but how to navigate those relationships that you have with someone. So again, if I'm with Dan, for example, on our call and we're really good friends, but Dan says something to me using a Google Doc when we're in the classroom, if I don't pivot, if I don't teach that child that online relationships look a certain way, but for me and Dan, there might be an awkward moment that might lead to some tension. And this is where we start to see big issues around cyberbullying. Does this make sense, everyone? So like, this is where we're kind of rolling at. This is a really great starting place about, well, what do we do with this next? All right, so let me kind of contextualize this for you in some really real examples that we are actually seeing. Next slide. So the first thing we're kind of seeing when a child first is exposed to technology is a pressure to actually respond to digital communication, right? I don't know what to say when someone actually responds in this particular way. When a child is first introduced to social media connections, any introduction to media in a social way, often kids have the anxiety that's associated to constantly respond to something. Even as adults, if you've ever noticed that you are in different group chats, at some point you're just like, I don't want to say like good job, or I don't want to just validate what the last comment was. There's some angst at some point that often develops. Think about that for our younger kids. We're going to give you some tips on how to respond to that if these are the kids that that are encountering this connection. Next slide. This is, you might actually see the form actually taking place on platforms like TikTok. So this is an example of last month. There's a site that says like, this is why this person is the most ugliest person on social media on TikTok. And this is basically a series of videos that occurred a number of months ago, but that have now been replicated with different TikTok accounts, where someone will pick something that they don't like about someone and just pick on them, right? So earlier I picked on Jason's nice beard. If I were to continue to make videos on Jason's beard, which I would never, Jason, your beard's amazing again. But if I were to continue to do that, at some point, Jason's like, wow, that I actually feel attacked by what you're like focusing in on. This is very real for kids when they're seeing some of these trends, right? So think of this differently. You might have noticed that there's quite a number of TikTok challenges. One of them being for kids that don't associate with those challenges, an actual attack on those kids for not participating on those challenges, right? So a TikTok being made about someone not actually participating in the challenges for fear of getting in trouble or whatever the case is. I won't click on this particular video, but you will see. Well, actually, click about 5 seconds just so you can kind of see what this actually looks like. I think your audio is off on that stuff facility, but
look at this next clip. Everyone was a bag of dicks in group therapy today because I said I shove my fingers between my pussy lips and my.
so you can kind of notice really quick, like the users here will are essentially starting to critique another person's TikTok video. So it's like a review of the person's TikTok videos. And then they are making fun of how the person's actually narrating their own personality and their own identity around this. So let's move on to the next piece. I'm going to kind of close off with, connect with the next kind of pieces, which is sometimes they're a lot more nuanced, and we don't see this happening as much, but these are also stressors that our kids actually have to encounter. I'm kind of giving you an example based on kind of my own example here. So clearly I don't know Obama or any of his family during this time, but I had a student replicate what it would be like if somebody impersonated me. So they had a chance to Photoshop my face, and I had 20,000 likes for having a dinner with the Obama families, right? This is a really simple kind of a example of how someone can easily capture your image and repurpose it for something, right? So these are the stressors. If I don't know that my posting is actually being validated by someone else, then I have to defend myself for something that actually never occurred, right? So these are the kind of nuances that our kids navigate on that. Let me just take a pause if you're like, oh my God, I hate my life, or I hate social media, or this is the worst ever that happened to our society. Breathe for a second, because there are some things that we can potentially do about it, but these are some of the realities that we're seeing based on the connection. Let me pause for a second with folks that are on the call. Are there any questions or any comments or anything that you all are seeing that you'd like to highlight or amplify?
Jamie, I have a question. This is Dan
Sure.
from Iowa.
Thanks.
So when you're saying, like you're saying the word kids a lot, and I just didn't know if when you say kids, are you saying like kind of teenager kids, or are we seeing it down to 8, 9, 7-year-olds? Are we seeing like at some ages, some of these actions become, like more important? For one thing, you just talked about how, that pressure to respond to communication kind of thing. Is that something that grows with kids over time, or kind of define maybe more the age group that we're talking about?
I appreciate that question, and thank you very much for asking that. And I think I need to be a little bit more clear in terms of the demographic. So let me break it down for you. What we see in terms of trends are threefold. When a child first receives a device, and this can be pre-kindergarten all the way up into 2nd or 3rd grade, we see a fascination with tech, right? Wow, I'm finally seeing a YouTube video clip or the animations are causing me for me to be stimulated by something. You start to see when a child then gets into third to maybe fifth grade that they start to navigate places where they are social with others. And this could be a Google Doc, this could be a roadblocks game, this could be where kids are starting to navigate friendships in these particular spaces. And they have to navigate conversations within those spaces, right? So if you and I are in that age group bucket, we are trying to figure out what friends actually mean. And so when they get a request, I keep using the game Roadblocks, for example. When they are on a game like that, they might associate that game both physically. Did you play Roadblocks last night? And if so, what are you doing? For those that are not in that, it might be hard to kind of socialize. But for those that are in that, the connection is really subtle, right? Which is, I want you to join my game, or I want you to actually be a part of that. And the pressure, I think, early on for our kids to navigate these communications is very real. And right around fifth grade, sixth grade, up into ninth grade, 10th grade, you start to see another shift where then a child then is exposed to social media platforms that are much bigger, right? We see earlier increase in kids joining TikTok, the platform TikTok, where they're then representing themselves based on these things. And the stakes become a little higher, which is, what can I do to separate myself from the friends and the connections that I've made, so I can there feel validated by their presence. And this is where we start to kind of get the remnants of influencers kind of approaching our kids to want to connect, right? I want to separate myself from my peers so I can then be not popular, but I can be validated in those particular terms. So some of the examples that I gave, they really start early on, which is when we introduce kids to technology, being extremely mindful about what stressors might actually appear, or we might anticipate them being confronted with when they are in these particular spaces. Does that make sense? Does that kind of give you an array here? Yeah, great question.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It causes me a little of it, just reflection too, from my own personal experience. Like I teach elementary computer science, so I've got kindergartners through fifth graders, and there's been just a lot of times that I've just thought to myself in class, it's funny to watch kids on the computers doing the different activities because they're so social. Like first graders, second graders, they want to play with each other, even though the activity is it's not an online social game. They're playing two separate, platforms or whatever, but they're constantly needing to talk to each other,
yeah,
as if they're playing the same way. So when you say that, we see that emerging kind of desire to congregate in these online spaces, it just was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely seeing that, I guess, in my kids.
absolutely, Dan. And I really appreciate you naming that. And I think it's, for the folks on the call and for folks joining us, I think it's important to kind of ask and take inventory, reflect on where are those spaces. And I just, again, really value that commentary, Dan, because it's pointed and it's everywhere. And oftentimes our aim is to be more intentional when we see those spaces, not to discredit that these are going to happen, but to create guidelines about what that looks like. Next slide, please. That kind of leads me to the question, which is, what are these stressors then, and how do we actually start to name them? Not put a stigma behind them, but just name that these are the spaces that could potentially occur. Well, oftentimes when I speak in front of administrators, they come to me and they say, Jamie, this happened at our site, and we have a compliance, and we're sending out this protocol communication, and we got this down, and this is not going to impact our community. Well, in reality, what has actually happened is we've addressed this situation late. We haven't normalized that this is going to be part of a dilemma that our kids are grappling with. And we haven't been proactive in naming for our community the areas that we can help our kids become agents of change or advocate for themselves. Again, this is not a critique for administrators. This is simply an invitation for everyone joining on the call to name where those potential stressors might be in the activities or in the lessons that you share. That make sense? All right, so take a moment, if you are joining us, to reflect on that. Where are those moments? Again, as you do that, I'm going to give you some examples so we can be really practical. If I'm teaching computer science and I'm teaching my kids coding, for example, we're doing a unit on specific coding, I might say to our kids, we're going to play this game, this coding game, And in that coding game, some of you guys are going to interact with one another. And sometimes we might actually have some conflict about how this code was written that would cause stress to some of you. When you feel that, here's what I want you to type, or here's how I want you to actually work with your peers. So you name when you're stressed out in these particular spaces. Are we okay with that? And then we're practicing the language early on and the parameters to enjoy connection. If you're at a county office or if you're working to support teachers or administrators across the board, I might simply say this year, in addition to laying out our acceptable use agreements on behalf of the county or on behalf of the norms that we have, I might consider that we add a calendar of potential stressors that might impact our kids throughout the entire year. It might look like at the beginning of the year, there's going to be natural kind of angst for our kids going back into school. Here's the stressors that we might anticipate you addressing early on with your staff, right? So you just start to create a language and a narrative and a pathway that might help to foster broader conversations in the classroom. Make sense? All right, let's move on, because you're like, okay, enough of stressors, Jamie, you're stressing me out just talking about these stressors. And let's get into what are some practical things that you can do in your class tomorrow. Next slide. The first thing we want to do is we always want to check over the mental well-being of our kids in these particular spaces. And if there's one thing that has come to the surface this year is that the essence to build in SEL, social emotional learning and activities and skills for our kids. I might suggest, if you are teaching computer science or if you're working directly with apps, that you build in or you incorporate apps that include mental health wellness. This could be an app like Calm, or this could be a help like COVID Coach. These are a number of apps that you can help to introduce to help set your students or your class on board. What we've done here in this slide is provided you an entire resource of apps that actually help to address and surface mental health across age groups. So it's never too late to really introduce these things. If you're working directly with teachers, it could be something like, we're going to start 5 minutes by actually meditating on some of the stresses that you've had. It helps kids to provide an outlet. It helps staff to center themselves when they have that. So this would be something, if you're joining the call, Lily, or anybody else, if you can kind of share any of the resources as we go through, but I'll let you click on the apps on that stuff. So take a moment to think about where those spaces are, where those apps that you might consider using on that. You kind of notice there's quite a number of things. Since COVID happened, there's been a number of app developers. If you go to our site, again, this is all completely free. You could see a review of these apps and the age bracket that they're actually intended for. So for example, at the top, if you see like my Kin Cloud, it's intended for age 5. We give it a comprehensive review that you might be able to kind of use. So either whatever works for you is best. Next slide. We also notice that sometimes, so one is to actually start to normalize it and provide some of those apps. The other thing you can consider doing is starting to model and starting to role play what kids might actually be doing in these particular spaces. And so what we've done is we partnered with Cornell, Common Sense, we partnered with Cornell to come up with a module for how kids navigate the digital world. So rather than say, don't be on social media or be on social media, or don't post this or post this, helping kids to actually navigate what they're actually seeing in a closed environment, in an environment that could potentially help them out is great. So the Social Media Test Drive app is essentially a replica, a clone of what our kids might be seeing on Instagram or social media. And again, it doesn't help to validate for our kids to use it. It just says, if exposed to this, here's what you should be aware of. And then it gives the onus back on kids about what they would do based on some of the dilemmas that they are actually confronted with. So if you get a chance, again, this is a completely free app on our site. You can use that test drive to actually help address some of those needs, to help to model and to coach kids and to pivot during those particular times. All right, let me pause. Are there any comments, any questions around that on, this is how I would do it in my class. If I were you and I was fifth grade teacher, sixth grade teacher, seventh grade teacher, this is where I might introduce it to our kids. You can also do something where you're pulling in things like roadblocks and saying, if you're building out a replica of roadblocks or gaming in general, and thinking about the ethics, thinking about, when we build for something, are we making the experience inclusive of others? If not, let's create a build out of whatever the assignment is, with the intention of validating others in the space or making it much more comprehensive or much more inclusive, I should say. Now you might be thinking, oh, Jamie, this is so hokey. Like, don't go eat another granola because this is not going to work for me, right? Like we're not going, this isn't about a compliance issue. This is just this is about really addressing the needs, the social and emotional needs of our kids. All right, next slide. So if I haven't hit home yet, the key here is we need to provide spaces to build these habits. So what I've done thus far is giving you resources about the environments where you can identify those stressors and help to pivot. Now what we're going to do is we're going to shift into thinking, what are the habits that we actually want to create? And I'm going to close with and provide sort of the remainder of the session into more of a practical thing that you can do every day, either in your pedagogy, if you're a teacher, if you're on behalf of a county or district, what you can actually do as a campaign that can reinforce some of these skills across your sites. Next slide. So let me give you some background about what I'm going to share. The Common Sense has worked with a Harvard project, the Project Zero at Harvard, where we started to look at dispositions and behaviors, how kids behave, what are the essence, what are the tools needed to shift some of the issues that they see. And what we found is that these issues are very complex. They're often not just black and white, there's nuances to these experiences, and that we need to provide instead kids techniques and habits in order to help to mitigate some of these issues that they're confronted with online, right? So what we've then provided is what we refer to as our dispositions, these habits of mind. I'm going to provide you 3 that you can help to model for you, and then I'm going to let you know what these activities are and what they do in real life in a second. So the first one is we need to check in with ourselves, right? What are the feelings that we are encountering, and what are the options that I have when I'm confronted with these feelings? These options or dispositions are primarily for our middle school to high school kids, but this is a habit or a routine for those kids to practice re-examining what they post, so they are actually reducing comparison to others. What are the things that I feel when someone posts something about themselves and I have FOMO, right? This fear of missing out. What can I do instead? These are the habits that we are trying to instill. Next slide, I'll show you how this all works in a second. The next habit is about a habits checkup. Right? This is for our younger kids to identify what are the things in their lives that they want to have control over when it comes into accessing technology. So you might be working with a first or second grader that's very impulsive when they're in front of an actual device. And we want to make sure that there's a pre-checklist before they enter that space. We know this from being teachers. We know that there's pre-work that our kids do before they enter our activities. But this is actually a habit checkup that they can actually do. This is a way for them to say, I need to do step 1, step 2, step 3. So my habits are built in before I enter any particular space. This helps our kids to mitigate any issues of reactivity early on by providing them basic tools or a checklist about the things that they actually could do. So we refer to as this position or this activity as a digital habits checkup. And again, I'll model for you about this or for you in a second about what these look like. Next one. And the final one is really, as our kids get older, their ability to take a stand over issues is front and center, right? We want to make sure that as our kids are confronted with stressors, whether they're confronted with cyberbullying issues or whether they are taking a stance against a particular civic topic or an issue that's happening in their site, we don't want to simply like negate our kid. I mean, we don't want to provide no spaces for our kids to actually voice their concerns. We want to create an enhanced civic duty that we have as a society. And the way to actually do that is helping and providing routines where our kids are understanding the complexities for many of these issues that they're confronted with online, and for them to take a stand, but for them to realize why they're taking that stand in the first place, right? If I can kind of sum up what I'm seeing right now on social media as adults, it's really our ability to, our inability to take a step back and pause and to reflect on any other perspective that we've in civil discourse that could help to bridge some of the connections and the nuances we had. That's my soapbox, but I'll stop on that, right? So these are the taking a stand routine is helps us as our kids to help to understand the greater purpose behind why they've actually chose the issue or stance or whatever dilemma that they might be confronted with. All right, I'm talking at you. I'm going to stop for a second, but let me tell you what this is all means, and then we're going to go into an activity about how this actually works. Next slide. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do with all these routines is this. We want our kids to reflect, right? We want them to slow down before they're in front of technology. We want them to be able to seek facts and evidence before they respond to something or they engage in any dilemma that they have or any stressors that they have. We want them to empathize and be able to know how to consider other perspectives. And then we want them to then take those perspectives to envision what options that they might have in their lives related to whatever dilemma that they're confronted with. That's, in essence, that's sort of the pathway for what we refer to as our dispositions across common sense. Now, enough talking, Jamie, like let's get into this practical thing. So here's what we're going to do to make this come to life. Next slide. I'm going to give you all on this call a dilemma, and this could be a dilemma that you're grappling with as a teacher, or this could be a dilemma that you as a county office or district are grappling with. The dilemma is really irrelevant. The way in which we handle it is probably key, and it reinforces the point here. For the sake of being mindful of my voice, can I have someone else on the call do that? Gloria Evans, I'm sure you have an acting voice at some point. Would you be so kind as to read the first paragraph if you're available? And you can just say, absolutely not. Like that would cost you too much money, Jamie, for me to do that. I'm fine with that.
Always wanted to try some voice modeling, so I can volunteer for the second.
Jared, you're so great. I already thank you for prepping your voice as well.
I actually have a horrible voice, but here we go. A group of students had recently gotten into TikTok dares. At lunch or during class, they would dare each other to say something strange or funny to a classmate or teacher, or do harmless things like wear their shirt inside out. Shall I continue? That'd be helpful.
Please, yes.
Awesome. Recently, the dares got pretty intense. A student shared that one night over group chat, another student, Gabe, dared everyone to message sexual images to classmates. Anna took on the challenge and sent a photo of a nude female without showing the head or face to their group chat of 5 kids. Monday morning, one of the students told the teacher about this. What should happen now?
Now, I'm going to preface what we're about to do with this, that the dilemma itself, and I need to be really clear with this, the dilemma could be anything, right? I mentioned at the very beginning that my child was exposed to a show called Squid, and they're reenacting it in the school yard, and now it's creating a dilemma. The dilemma could be, we have a number of students that are harassing someone else, and now they're posting this on the video. What should I do? Someone came forward. We all have a dilemma that has confronted either our site or students. If you're grappling with younger kids, it could be about how to navigate when someone says that they were mean to you and they're using the term, I was being cyberbullied or I'm being bullied. So we want to be really clear that when you think about dilemmas, we want to immediately take ourselves back and say, what is my bias first? Like, where am I reacting to this scenario? First of all, I want to name as a presenter, I have a 6-year-old daughter. So every time I read a scenario like this, it triggers something in me. And so if I'm an administrator, I'm immediately going to go into consequences and what are the policies, because I'm ultimately have to keep all of our kids safe, which is you need to, but I want to suspend that as much as we can as we think about that doesn't often help to resolve and address the bigger context and the bigger issues, which is have we helped these kids, Anna, Gabe in this case, address the underlying issues. And this is what we're ultimately trying to do, right? Building those habits, because we can't always be in front of them or create the best parameters. So next slide for you. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to, we'll toggle between these two slides for a second, but I want you to really think about how might this situation be handled? Like how could this actual situation be handled? Come up with as many ideas as possible, right? That there's no actual right answer in this case. You might say, absolutely, there's a right answer. Suspend everyone and move on with your day, Jamie. Like, why would you introduce that? But you take a step back and say, like, how might we then ensure that the outcomes that we have are positive for everyone actually involved? Right? I want us to really open up. There's an assumption here that I'm making that we care about our students. I mean, there's maybe one or two that I'm like, oh, how do I deal with you when I was a teacher? But for the most part, we care about our kids, right? So that's what we want, the best of them. Let's just take a moment to toggle back to the dilemma and think about what are some ways that, what are some solutions or ideas that we might address some of these issues with this particular dilemma. And if you got it, and if you just want to unmute and say, I got it, Jamie, I think I got the best answer in all this for us all, then by all means.
This is so complex, and I, my mind immediately went to consequence and like legal issues, right? I think there's some big things to unpack here, but if we're talking like some restorative practices, I think that supporting students in conversations around, I'm on the social media test drive website, and there's a tile there called shaping your digital footprint. And there really seems to be an opportunity here to talk with students, not only about like we get dressed every day and we go to school and we're putting on, we're sharing an image of ourselves in person, and it's no different online. And in fact, it has permanence in many ways online. But I also like the idea of like talking about digital fingerprints, that sometimes we think that things might be in private, that this is a group of five, that the reality is that you're putting a fingerprint on something and it could go anywhere. So it seems like there's an opportunity to dive into some digital citizenship content here with the students. But like I said, my mind immediately went to consequence and like legal matters. Like this is, good grief, this is not an easy topic.
Absolutely, Jared. I echo and I appreciate you just sharing the nuances, the complexities. I mean, right away, again, as a former administrator, I automatically go with like, who's at fault here? What has happened? What is the image? Who needs to be informed? Who do we need to actually have consequences to? And again, these are legal issues as well, maybe even safety issues if we have SROs, student resources officers at our site. If these are actual real images. So 100% agree with you on that. And I want to also say, to your point, right, how are we actually developing those and alleviating some of the stresses that come with it and teaching our kids this particular space? Dan, did you want to comment on that or anything else? These are really great comments. So sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was also thinking about that, what should happen now. Sometimes I think that this kind of thing could be an opportunity for the district, though, to get a better understanding or a handle of what actually might be happening within their students. So sometimes I know it might be tempting to try and view this as a one-time thing, when in reality it could be one of those red flags that says there's more going on here that you may not know about. And so if regardless of what the situation would be when these kind of big things happen, this I would hope that like schools could take this as the opportunity to have some discussions, maybe trusted teachers with students to say, wait, is this an actual thing? Is this how do people feel about this? Is this okay? Is this not okay? To get kind of the lay of the land, because that could really then guide what future steps do need to be. Do we need more education on this topic or that topic? Or is this a bigger issue, or is this just confined to a smaller, a group of students? But I would hope that, again, as I'm sure that some people are focusing on consequences and whatnot, but there'd also be a group of teachers out there or educators or administrators who'd be trying to figure out what is this actually saying is happening in our schools, and what's the social undercurrents that might be causing it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love both, again, you and Jared are taking on this dilemma, and you're addressing both of the things that need to happen. And there's and the truth is that it's, as Jared pointed out, it's really nuanced, right? It's really complex. But here's what I want us to invite us to, and this is what I'll close with, which is there's an opportunity here to do a few things. So remember a second ago, I said there's certain routines that we can have. One is feelings and options. The other one is a digital habits check-in, and the other one is taking a stand. If I'm a teacher, if I'm a student, or if I'm an administrator, I might first get out the parameters, right? In our school, this is what we value with to reinforce your own positive digital identity at the school. You know, if you are caught with these things and like deciding that this is what you're going to do, these are going to be the consequences. Families, be aware that this is something that we're going to do. We do this all the time with our acceptable use policies, our media policies, and that's great, right? The second thing we want to do is to ensure that all of our families are aware that these issues are occurring in the first place. When I speak with families, they often say, I didn't know my kids can do that, or I didn't know my kids actually do this online. And rather than actually addressing those issues with families, simply saying, it is your role on behalf of the school or on the district or in my classroom or even on behalf of the county to educate your child, educate yourself on how your child is navigating these issues, this application for coding, so on and so forth, right? So once we've gotten those parameters down, here's an opportunity for us. If I'm in third grade and this is not a TikTok challenge, but this is something that happened with an incident that happened with students, I might say, we're going to address how you feel about something that feels really icky inside when you're confronted with something inside. And I'm not a counselor here, but we're going to share with you habits that you can have when we experience this thing that happened in our community, right? And that's opening the door up for allowing kids to say, the next time this happens, these are the feelings that I can have, and these are the options that I can have with those particular feelings, right? And then we can move on to saying, the next time that happens, my habit checkup, the thing that I need to know before I'm confronted with these dilemmas, is by pausing, meaning I don't have to respond to that nude or I don't have to send that nude. And instead I can do this instead. So teaching our kids how to create those experiences. And then finally saying at our school, we value good communication with each other when we're online. And this is how we're taking a stance as our community. Over the next month, we are going to have positive digital citizens or digital advocates at our school. And we're going to highlight all the positive things that we're doing across the county, across my classroom, so on and so forth. So you see kind of what we just did here. It doesn't negate that. It really adds just a little flavor of what Dan just said, which is there are these undertones that we could potentially have with our students. So, all right, I'm speaking to the choir. You all, I don't know why I came here. You guys could have just led the session to begin with, but folks on the call, I think that are not on the call, I really want to encourage you to don't shy away from those dilemmas that you are confronted with, either in your classroom or on your school or even on a broader level. I really address them head on by naming them and demystifying kind of the triggers that happen. If you find that you are not doing what you should be doing as a policy, or that name for your families that this is all new for everyone, that these spaces are constantly evolving, and that it's perfectly okay to be in the same pathway with your particular family. So, all right, let's just close with just a call to action for you all, unless there's any other question. I'm going to ask you all to think about, if you're not on this call or if you are on the call, when you think about what your lessons look like or who you're engaging with in your meetings tomorrow, take a moment to find the space to see how you can actually alleviate the stressors of your kids, of your colleagues, of just spaces in general that create online stress for others. And take a moment to name it, and then explore what that actually looks like. We've given you a number of resources, whether they're lessons or activities to model, as well as some of these dilemmas that we've shared with you. And to that, unless there's any other questions, which I'm completely open for, I wish you an amazing luck and happy month of October, I suppose. So any questions before we close from the group, or any other thoughts or any other suggestions or insights that we can offer our community?
So Jamie, the example that you used, the situation, definitely a trigger for me. I used to teach high school, and I had probably like half of the ninth graders at one point, and this became an ongoing problem. And one of the things that I learned is that the students didn't understand the legality behind participating in child pornography, because they've never understood that to be a component of it, like sharing nudes online. And that was something I realized, that, okay, I had an opportunity to help educate them and better understand that there are real consequences. And so, but even like finding ways for them to, whenever they were caught in these situations, whether they were the ones participating or were the victims of this process, I don't know how many, I don't have enough fingers to like how many times I've had to like comfort students to get them to a point where, okay, you're gonna be okay. We're gonna figure this out. But I really wish that I had this posted in my classroom, like your dispositions. It feels like a really good step-by-step process on bringing someone like through that experience of dealing with, I have a situation and I don't know what to do. And so this is all retrospective now, but this is a very powerful conversation that we're having, and this topic that we're covering, and all the resources that you're providing us. I'm hoping that more people are really going to tune in to this recording and see that if I had this conversation earlier and identified what the digital stressors were and normalized them, so that we could talk about it up front and we can call it out now, so that when we have to deal with it, it's not foreign.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that people are gonna and I'm hoping more people are going to be exposed to your org and your message, because this is like really important.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for that validation. I think it starts young. First of all, I think they're in those everyday moments. I think Dan at the very beginning mentioned those spaces where there could be potential conflicts, right? Where it could miscommunication of sorts that are taken out of context, or assignments that go that don't go as well when our kids are online. So we have to be able to expose those habits early with our kids. The second is really being mindful that at a policy level, in addition to setting those parameters, those consequences that I think you mentioned, these are the real life consequences of exchanging nudes for accounting for our city. In addition to that, because I don't want to negate that responsibility. I think those are very real concerns for families, for victims. In addition to that, we also have to navigate that at that age. We all know as adults, those are the times that our kids are navigating nuanced relationships, right? And they're exposing all that in online spaces. So we have to not discredit that, but say these are the parameters, these are the habits you need to sort of build in. And then when there has been an incident, or there has been trauma, or there has been stress, being okay with having the places of support in place, but also being able to use the experience as a learning opportunity for future students, to also highlight what they've done, right? That I really want to highlight that we have at our school a positive digital identity or digital group, or I really want to highlight this particular student that says these are the great ways that we navigate relationships. So, and I know some folks on the call, or not on the call, but folks maybe listening to the recording might say, yeah, right, Jamie, I have 15 things I have to do. Like, you want me to be a counselor, and you want me to be a math teacher, and you want me to teach computer science. Bear in mind that these things don't have to take more than 5 minutes. I'm going to close with this, which is again a similar story, but what I used to do in my class as a potential like next step. I realized early on that my students had a digital identity, and I noticed that rather than actually confront them and address that and provide punitive kind of consequences for kids knowing that they're going to be online, what I began doing is I began allocating a certain amount of funds for our overall school's budget to highlight what kids were doing that were making a positive difference in our community. And every time we had an assembly, I taught at a high school, every time we had an assembly, I would call those kids of mine. We used to call it a digital well-being person. I had them come up and I had them share whatever their post was, whatever the image that they did, to highlight something positive in our community. And then what we did is we began running campaigns. We began sharing that in our newsletter, so our kids actually felt like they were advocating, they're participating with something good. There were some positive role models. So we clearly still had negative stuff going on, but that didn't take very long to do. And when I was a teacher, we built that into warm-ups, right? What were some things related to this content that you think we did really well? And or if you're a math teacher, count the number of times that you actually like someone's post that made a bigger difference in their lives or said something really positive. Let's count it over the month, and this is how we're going to continue to keep track or identify that. So, all right, I'll stop on that stuff, but unless there's any other questions, wonderful comment.
So if there's no other questions or comments, Jamie, this was like amazing. So impressed by your presentation. I wanted to thank you and Competence Media for allowing you to join us today and to talk about digital citizenship and bullying prevention.